very loyal, Osrith told him. And she told Eswi all she could remember, from the first day, when he had taught her to ride, on the road between Dunnottar and Stirling, of the night when he had taken her by the hand so they could flee Glashku, of her time training and working with him and his disappearance at Dara. Of the four of them, all easy in each other's company, Finno carefree and a carer of others. Fergus, as long as he was fed, everything else came to him. It hurt to remember her to be husband, the soulful man who was as tough as weathered willow. He is at Caerleul now, Eswi said. I went back to see him, very briefly. He is a priest, now, like I am. He said you did him the greatest of service. But Osrith did not elaborate on her service, of giving the last of her silver so he could escape the Slavers. Instead, she asked Eswi about their childhood together, on Arran, educated by the monks from Iona, and she closed her eyes shortly afterwards, as a sea eagle circled over them, making the caw-caw call of their species as they look for their roost. Felim and Engus had been taking turns to get them past the end of Wellies and turn east under the cover of night to minimize potential attacks by Norse acting as raiders wanting a quick wealth fix, and Osrith had woke into the ship bobbing at a rude harbour on the south coast of Deheubarth, with Engus in close conversation with two people on beach. Eswi was with them too, as Felim slept at the other end of the ship, and when he saw Osrith stand up, gave her a wide wave. Osrith waved back, but might have stretched too far, because she felt the familiar nausea in her stomach and was sick all down the side of the ship, reaching for a skin to rinse her mouth. When she looked to the two warriors again, she saw Angus bring two women to the ship, and he called Osrith to them. One of the women, on seeing her pregnant stomach, said something to the other, and pulled out of a basket a large brown, grey loaf, and a wooden bowl containing what Osrith knew to be laurel. They say, I think, Angus told her, that you can have the bread and seaweed. I have paid them. They are of Dyft, he added, as if this was important. And the women helped Osrith down onto the sand and sat by her, pressing the food to her, and saying words which, though she could not understand. In the end, the younger woman mimed eating it, and the strong, rich laurel flavor tasted good with the soft, new-baked bread. They speak Cymric here, too, Angus told them, but a changed Cymric, like one which was originally spoken in the lands that are now Wessex. And in West Wales, Cornwallam folk speak it too, and, they say, those people living just over the water. And Angus went on to tell them that the Cymric of this coast had always been at odds with the Cymric who had come from the Hen Oled, the Old North, and settled in Gwynedd, and Osrith found she was not surprised at the folk memory, that must have been over 400 years old, was still persistent. They prefer the Gaels, Eswi told her, and Osrith noticed the satisfaction in his voice, and looked when he pointed out a huge island, named after the species of bird that most densely populated it. Lundy, he told her. Do they mark Samhain? Osrith asked him, for it was close to that Gaelish festival. No, replied Angus. Not down here. Do you feel the sigh, still? If I do, it is not strongly, Osrith replied, truthfully, and it was truth that, when she was in Alba, whether Bishand, or Strathclyde, their presence seemed almost overwhelming at times. Felim took the helm now, as Eswi took the tiller, and it was Angus's turn to sleep. Osrith watched the gradual convergence of coasts as they made their way east following the Cymric coast, and Felim, whether to mark Samhain or not, began the soft song of a wanderer from his cold mountains who was travelling to the land of his kin and chanced upon a fay of the Sai one night of Samhain, moonlight and starlight making jewels in her hair and on her dress, and he was enchanted to watch her dance, and the fell in love with her, and she him. Of course, it is always the fay who has to give up something for the man, Eswi remarked, caustically. She had given up her immortality to live mortal life with him, when she hardly knows him. Such is the way of things, Osrith thought. A woman's life is never her own. It is her father's, her brother's, her husband's which she must follow. Or her king's. Osrith was sick once more, as the coasts narrowed again, and suddenly, there was a jolt as Felim drew the ship to one side, looking out across the estuary of the river. Sephan, he told Eswi, when their warrior asked, and Osrith looked back to the land. knowing it to the same river that she had her Mercen warriors had followed in pursuit of Uthed and the children Ethelstan and Elfwin, and the one they had taken back to Saltwick a few days later, in a more dignified manner. Had that been only a few months before? It was now nearly November, and that had been August. Her bump had barely rounded her stomach then, but now it was difficult to hide. And there was something else, too, something Osrith knew was not quite right, but before she could set her mind to discovering what that was, the wave came. 88,888,888. Not a wave that the sea might give, a regular, stormy bump that broke on the hull and passed you up over it. This wave was more a continuous swell, which gathered in the estuary and grew and grew. Whether Phelim or Eswi or the now awake Angus understood what it really was, none said, and Eswi screamed for Osrith to hang on to the ropes that were used for tying up, and he stumbled towards her, tying her arms to them. The wave hit, and did not break, and the ship travelled with it up the river, the swell seeming to pull them up in the wrong direction of the Severn's flow. Phelim fought to draw in the sail, which was making the effect worse, and Angus's arms, as thick as adolescent trees, held the sail inwards to lessen the effect. Osrith closed her eyes. She opened them when she felt a hand on her shoulder and a soft voice calling her name. "Eswi," she managed, as the spy's black hair fell over either side of his shoulders, and his pale blue-grey eyes looked at her intently. "Are you hurt?" he asked, and Osrith blinked several times, trying to get her bearings. There had been a wave, she knew. I don't think so," she replied, and he helped her up. "It's called a tidal bore," he explained to Osrith as Phelim caught her other hand and helped her up onto the dockside. "We expected a swell, for we are later than we anticipated. But it is a spring tide, which made the effect more. And we are here." Here was Gloucester. As Osrith looked around, she could see a neat, well-used harbour which someone had gone to the trouble to bring rocks to the river bank, to make the constant landing of merchant ships more durable. Beyond the harbour, stakes were driven into the ground, where eel traps were set. They would be bountiful that evening, no doubt, Osrith thought, with such a force of tide. "Perhaps," Angus said, as they pulled their belongings from the ship. "Or the power drove straight through them and broke them." He looked up, at the buildings which began the city of Gloucester. "We are here in time, though," he added, "and it is indeed Samhain. Tomorrow, Ethelfled will be addressing the Witan after the cathedral service for All Saints' Day." "And we must be there," Osrith replied, for she was decided. Whatever it was they were in Gloucester for, there was something she had to do, to make a wrong right. 88,888,888. And, it was over to Osrith, too, to make arrangements for the night. The city, with wide, green fields around it, was densely packed, arranged in a grid-like system, planned and executed by the lady herself. So was the boast of the landlord of the Swan when Osrith asked about lodgings. Not herself surely? Osrith asked, and the landlord squinted at her, Osrith's accent throwing him a little, as she imagined the woman marking out the grid lines, handling and hauling the stone. She came out of the image as the man rapped on the counter. "Irian," Osrith said. "My companions have difficulty with the English and the Saxon tongue." It was at this point, the landlord switched to the Cymric that the Dyfed women had been using, which was even more difficult for Osrith to understand than his sprawling Saxon dialect. "He says 2 rooms," Osrith translated, making out that Angus was their leader and was struggling with the man's words in any language. "We are here for the Witan." The man frowned. "Come to make your plea to the lady?" he asked, sniffing a bit of mucus back up his large, red nose. "Land, is it? Or pirates?" "Norse," Osrith said, as the man continued to pour ale. Though they had not asked for it, Osrith's silver seemed to imply it was part of the bargain, and there were no complaints from Eswi, Angus, and Phelim. "You are out of luck," the landlord told her. "You would never get rooms here if there was going to be a Witan. The lady is not here." "Not here on All Saints' Day?" Osrith asked. The man shook his head. "She is up country, at Cester." "Norse, as you say," he told her, and Osrith relayed this back to the warriors. They took their drinks to the back of the alehouse and began to talk about what to do next, as more customers piled in through the narrow door. "We go the still," Osrith proposed. "We were told to come to the Vitton in Gloucester." Constantine did not say it was to do with Ethelfled, he mentioned Ethelstan. None of the three men with her could think of a better alternative and agreed to be up at dawn, the three of them keeping watch over them all in the two-room, which smelled of horse, for it was indeed an animal loft. Sick again, and Osrith was up far before dawn and got herself down from the loft and spoke softly to Eswi, who seemed to be away in his own thoughts when she got to alehouse door. The noise from within suggested that even in these early hours the prostitutes of Gloucester were busy touting for trade. "I have been here before," Eswi told Osrith, as he stared across the stable-yard to the conical tower of the cathedral. "My mentor at Tideway thought it would be good for me to experience the Augustine Church. I lasted 3 weeks." Osrith paused in her action of pushing open the misshapen oak door. "So you know the city?" she asked. "I know the city," Eswi said, and there was a sadness to his voice. "I know the city, knew the priests, the monks." He shook his head, and then focused on Osrith. "You are up early?" "I need to pee," Osrith said, "and some water." "Sick," she added, held her stomach as a wave of nausea passed. "Try the other side of the stable for a private corner. I'll get some boiled water." "Milk." "Water," Osrith agreed, gratefully, and when he brought it back, sat next to Eswi as he looked across to the city's streets again. "Oswald is here," Osrith said. "My ancestor. Ethliad sent him here, to give good blessings to Mercia." If the object was to turn the tide on Norse incursions, to smash their generals and make sure that they did not fix themselves in Mercia, then his saintliness worked, Eswi said, smiling wryly. "Of course, he was your kin," he added. "A person in life. Our Angle, Comsil's Angel of the North, bringing his Christianity to Lindisfarne and stubborn people." This was true enough, Osrith thought. After his victory over his uncle, Edwin, at Heavenfield, that is just what he had done, wearing out at least 2 monks from Iona before Aidan managed to adhere Christianity to an animistic community. And yet, the Irish Church was still linked to this. The circle in the Irish cross was the sun, offerings of flowers in spring at wells. Osrith rested a hand on Eswi's forearm. Was she beautiful? She smiled when Eswi turned to her. "Something like that?" "Something like that," he agreed, and turned when he saw Phelim come down the steps out of the loft too. Proto-dawn underscored the blackness when Osrith turned to look at him, and he nodded to her. "You're here," he said. "Angus is snoring like he's slaughtering a pig," he added. "Woke me up, you were gone." "I was here," Osrith replied, "Eswi getting me water, getting ready to go to the cathedral." It took another hour for Angus to get down to them. To be fair, he had took more than his share of sailing hours, and he stripped to the waist and thrust his head and torso into one of the horse's water butts, his long hair dripping down his back as he massaged his face. "Have you eaten?" he asked them all, noticing Osrith, Phelim and Eswi watching him. "I gave enough silver for breakfast," Osrith told him. "The landlord is around, he should be able to find you something." A handful of bread and meat, after downing a jar of ale, and Angus carried his breakfast as they all walked to the cathedral. A lot of other people were crowding by the door, many of them old, but some of them younger and well-dressed. Several children darted between legs, inventing their own entertainment while, every so often, parents pulled them back towards them. "They clearly think there's something happening," Osrith remarked, and they stood in the queue, as the doors stood firmly closed against them. They were merely bystanders, interested in the judgment of the lord or the lady, who would be sitting to hear cases that day, and Osrith wondered who it could be, for surely Ethelstan, only a little older than 12-year-old Edra, and someone who, for the interest of everyone, had been elusive for most of his life, would not be sitting in the chair to hear the people. It did not take long for the doors to open, however, and behind them, Osrith noticed, more people had joined the queue. Those at the front crossed the stone floor, where, unusually, glazed windows filtered the light through into the nave. Ahead of the queue a large chair sat, at the center of the cross shape of the cathedral. A man sat in it. "Can you see who?" Osrith asked of Eswi, but he shook his head. "I have never seen the child," he replied, and Osrith realized, of the three of them, only she had. "We need to get closer. We need a cover story," she added, and Eswi told this to Angus and Phelim. They were robbed by the Norse, and seek repairs to the ship until they could get underway, Angus suggested. It was good enough, and Osrith agreed. Then, as some of the people peeled away from the front of the queue, Osrith saw in the light, a lord of Wessex. Ethelelm. Panic gripped her stomach. If he recognized her, she knew, Ethelelm would know she had locked the door on Edward, and would know of Eardwulf's murder. "We need to go, now," Osrith hissed to Eswi, and he took her shoulder, making a play that there was a problem with the pregnant woman in the queue, turning her back on the judgment meeting, Phelim to her left, Angus to her right. She managed 3 steps before a hand clamped her shoulder. A voice came to her ear, the first instruction being not to talk, and the second to walk as quickly as she was able towards the cathedral's doors. Osrith did both, and was greeted by the sun, on this first day of November, shining merrily down onto Gloucester's commercial streets. "Fancy finding you here," the voice continued. Osrith turned slowly and looked into the face of the man arresting her. Father Pylig was grinning his affable grin to her, and she relaxed. Beside her, Phelim and Angus had withdrawn their swords. Later, Osrith would have cause to remember, that Eswi did not. "I last saw you in Aylesbury," Pylig told her, happily. "It is good to see you, Osrith." "Pylig!" she exclaimed. Osrith did not know the priest well, but he was a regular feature beside Oka when Alfred was alive, and when Bicca had died, beside Edward. "You are fancying your chances, aren't you?" he asked, eyes darting to her companions. "Come," Pylig added, and nodded to the warriors, his look lingering for a second longer on Eswi's face. "I know a place we can go, where we won't be understood." The alehouse they ended up in was a good 2 miles walk from the city. A thin, black-haired woman seemed to be in charge, and Pylig greeted her with a kiss. She held out her hands to him, and he kissed them, saying something low to her, which made her smile. "God in heaven, my wife," Pylig told the 4 of them, as a girl brought ales across to them. "I have no doubt she would be better off in another man's company, but she won't have it and insists on remaining married to me." He broke off so he could sip on the ale. Hesitatingly, Angus and Phelim did the same. Osrith did not, and Eswi got to his feet. "She needs milk, or water," he explained, as Pylig raised his eyes to Eswi, and he strode away to the bar. Osrith watched him go, and then looked back to Angus, who had switched to Gaelish to ask Osrith what was going on, and who this man was. His hand was on his sword, as was Phelim's. And then Osrith realized why it was Eswi was able to get a drink for her, and that she could understand the people around them. In Pylig's alehouse, the customers were all talking in Cymric. "Cymric," Osrith said aloud, and Pylig smiled. "I have a lot of exiles needing a place to meet," he told them, and slapped the table. But Angus was still looking at Osrith. "Pylig is an ally," she told Angus and Phelim in Gaelish, although Osrith wondered whether she believed it. "But they were here, weren't they?" She then repeated it in Cymric. "We don't speak that Cymric here," Pylig told her. "Would you prefer English? Although I am not sure I am totally competent." "Saxon, yes, and South Wallin." "Cumbric," Angus told him, and he laid his sword onto the table. "No need for that," Pylig told him. "We are kin, are we not? We are not Saxon?" He laughed. Angus did not. "How did you know I was there?" Osrith told him. "I mean, we were supposed to meet Aethelstan." "Aethelstan is not in Gloucester, and if he is to be kept safe, he will never be in Gloucester." Osrith looked up as Eswi put a jar of cooled boiled water in front of Osrith, and glanced at Pylig, grimly. "Then, why are we here?" asked Phelim. "If there is no purpose for us being in Gloucester." "There is a purpose, my Pictish friend," Pylig replied, placing his ale on the table, then looked across to Osrith. You nearly ended up in a good deal of hot water. If Ethelm had seen you. Edward was furious when he was finally released. He mistook Ed's coronation and his abdication in favor of Ethelflaed, because you locked him in. Angus looked across to Osrith, raising his eyebrows. Osrith stared back. I was trying to get back home, Osrith told him. I was about to be delayed. So I delayed Edward. And Pylig slapped the table loudly with his hand and burst into a booming laugh. Well now. He chortled. You got away all right, and got back to Alba. Yes, he nodded to Phelim and Angus. Then, Pylig looked at Eswi. You look well, my friend. Osrith looked across to Eswi. Pylig knew him? Aethelstan, Pylig told him. He is the key to Hywel. Aethelstan is to whom Hywel swore, as a child, here in Gloucester. He travelled all the way here from Tyduit about the potentially bastard child of Alfred's son. Can you not think why? Money? Angus suggested. Land? Could be. My Cumbric friend, Pylig replied. But more than that. Alliance. Hywel wishes to gain the whole of Wales under his own rule, when his uncle dies. And Alfred and Edward have sworn to do this, in perpetuity. In perpetuity. Pylig replied. Every generation, Alfred's line, Hywel's line. Osrith watched Eswi glance to Pylig. And what has this to do with Aethelstan? Osrith asked the obvious question. Why have we come all this way, with a wave pushing us directly to the city, to find out something that we could find out by letter? Because letters, Murch, are compromisable. Any letter traveling from any monarch has been read at least half a dozen times before it reaches its intended destination. No, Pylig added. You needed to find me, and the only way you could would be to attend a public event at a known time. So, not Aethelstan? Osrith felt like she was losing the thread of the conversation. Not directly. But, as I said, Hywel has already sworn to the boy, despite Edward having other children, despite Aethelstan's legitimacy being in question. Why? I have no idea, Osrith thought. Anarord. Angus replied. Anarord, and his fundamental hatred of everything Saxon. Exactly, my friend, exactly. Pylig replied. Hywel has spent his life engineering conditions so he can take kingdom after kingdom in Wales, conquering by popularity, naturally, with compassion, with justice. And his prize, my friends. Gwynedd. It was Phelim, now. The quietest of the warriors, who used this reserved part of his nature to deadly effect on the battlefield. The Pictish lord suggested just what Osrith was thinking. Gwynedd, my friends, Pylig laughed. This kingdom, unwilling to make alliances except, perhaps, with the Norse, is Hywel's aim. And Anarord knows it. He encourages the north of Dublin to raid into Deheubarth. But there is one thing the king of the Henoled has in his favour. And that is? It was Eswi who spoke now. But Pylig shook his head. You came by ship? Ha ha. He laughed, as Osrith nodded. The tidal bore. I was expecting you sooner. We failed to take the spring tide into account. It did no harm, except, perhaps to Osrith. Eswi gently teased. A little sick, he added. Pylig nodded. And you went home, Murch, back to Alba? To have your child? Osrith nodded. You are in your bloom. Pylig declared, taking up her hand and kissing the back of it. Women are most beautiful when they are great with child. He looked across to the bar, where his wife was serving ale. I always loved it when Haf was pregnant. She was so beautiful when, he gave a growling laugh, which he curtailed quickly when he realized he wasn't in wholly male company. So, Osrith attempted to summarize, as the name Haf stirred a memory in her mind. We have come to Gloucester in a clandestine manner, to meet you, Father Pylig. And we are here, in your very pleasant alehouse. She leaned towards the priest. Why? Pylig leaned towards her, and smiled. To meet Hywel, of course, he replied. To deliver your message to him from your king Constantine and take his reply back.